The big topic of the day everywhere. What will the 2019 elections, what will be the outcomes, and what will this mean for investors? Briefly, Modi is in trouble. He's facing domestic as well as global headwinds. He lost the elections in central India, losing the momentum he had earlier. The promise of Achhe Din, of everybody getting lots and lots of jobs, of income showing up, basically that has failed. There are agitations in state after state demanding job reservations because there aren't enough jobs for everybody. There are farm agitations in state after state because of agrarian distress. In Modi's 5 years, there has been no significant economic acceleration. His Make in India basically has not produced any industrial spurt, and he is trying to protect industry. So Make in India is becoming Protect in India, which is not necessarily a good outcome. The global economy is slowing. Japan and Germany close to recession. The US got a good fiscal stimulus last year, but that may fade this year. Mr. Trump is out to have various trade wars, especially with China. Brexit has created uncertainties in Europe. And so Mr. Modi's elections chances are clouded not only by headwinds within the country, but by global risks as well. The big new thing that has come, of course, is Pulwama. There was this attack on the Indian soldiers, 40 people have died. Now people throw back their memories to 1999. Kargil came out of the blue, and basically Kargil helped Mr. Vajpayee get re-elected. So the question is, can Pulwama help Mr. Modi get re-elected? Big question. I'll perhaps get into the details later on. All I can say is that in 1999, Vajpayee was very lucky. The Pakistanis, to their foolishness, mounted nuclear heads on missiles. When Clinton heard about this, he said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He summoned Nawaz Sharif and said, "You're going to denuclearize immediately and withdraw." So, against all expectations, the Americans interceded on India's side, which was very unusual given that Pakistan was an ally of theirs. And I do not think you will have similarities right now, but I'll get into that later. Which are the key issues? As I said, jobs, not enough jobs in sight, and you find that the railways are panicking, although the railways are overstaffed. I think last year they advertised 1.5 lakh jobs, this year advertising another 1.3 lakh jobs. It doesn't matter that they are overstaffed, they're trying to create an impression that Sarkar is providing some jobs. There is some controversy on whether jobs are rising or falling, but if you look at the CMIE, it is showing a very substantial fall of maybe 11 million jobs lost last year. The labor force participation, especially of women, appears to be crashing. Some of the figures we are seeing look almost too bad to be true. If the labor force participation is going to fall from 43% in 2005 to only 37% right now, and if in addition to that you have record unemployment, this does not seem compatible with 7% growth in GDP. So it seems to me that some of those figures are too bad to be true. What is true is that there is no avalanche of jobs. What is true is that there is a lot of dissatisfaction on that. Mr. Modi has offered a 10% quota for economically weaker sections to try and gain some ground. It may gain a little ground, but as I said, these are just ways of dividing up the existing pie. The pie is not growing, and that is a problem. Meanwhile, farm prices have crashed for a large number of items. Mr. Modi attempted to have very high minimum support prices. He could not implement that. And sometimes it is better not to make a promise than to make a promise and fail. You make a promise and fail, it hits you adversely. So now people are moving to cash transfers. There was one scheme in Telangana, one in Orissa. Mr. Modi himself in the budget has just offered 6,000 rupees per family. In the short term, this may help. It's not a long-term solution, but Mr. Modi hopes that this can undo some of the damage being done by farm distress. Key successes, the macros basically are much better, especially, I think, curbing inflation. Inflation has often been a vote killer in elections, and the fact that inflation is down, I think, is a plus for Mr. Modi. It is, of course, true that the other side of this coin is that low farm prices are causing farm agitations. Still, on balance, I would say curbing inflation is a clear plus. GST is a clear plus. IBC, the Insolvency Bankruptcy Code, a very major reform. The problem is it's still taking too long, and you need much more legal infrastructure, much faster resolutions. Other successes, Swachh Bharat, various glitches. I mean, the whole country has not been covered, but they say that, 60 to maybe 70% open defecation has actually been stopped, which is a very big advance, even though not complete. The Jan Dhan Yojana, probably 70-80% of people now have bank accounts. It's a significant amount. I did some research in a tribal area. In that tribal area, even almost 80% plus had bank accounts. And to me, that, it showed that it has actually worked. Surgical strikes on Pakistan, frankly, that was only political theater. You just, you ran in, threw bombs and ran out again. And initially, they weren't even aware that anything had happened. And we claimed a great victory. Actual impact is zero. I mean, as you can see, Pulwama happened. So, the mere fact that you did surgical strikes, has it discouraged Pakistan help to terrorism? Not at all. And any future action also will not particularly help. Nevertheless, the surgical strikes have added to Mr. Modi's image and his popularity. There has been improved infrastructure, big corruption down. I think Modi, despite everything, despite all the accusations on Rafale, most people say Modi has been a relatively honest man, brought down big corruption. Transparency International had a survey showing 53% of Indians say that Modi has stopped big corruption. However, state-level corruption continues and small bureaucratic stuff continues. A lot of businessmen will tell you that life has not changed very much. Modi disappointments, there was the demonetization bungle, glitches in GST, no jobs explosion, high MSPs flop. Modi ultimately, some people thought he will be a radical reformer. Far from being a radical reformer, he is proved to be just an incrementalist, passing the buck to state governments on things like labor land reform. No privatization, the bungled the Air India thing. The electricity reforms are an eyewash. Enormous systems still fundamentally bankrupt. And finally, Modi promised development for all. But the fact is the attacks on Christians and Muslims, his attacks on NGOs, on the media, there is a lot of social discord and disharmony. This is a clear minus of Modi's rule. Okay, let's get towards the election business. Two things that have a major impact on polls very often are actual performance and anti-incumbency. There's an Economic Times study which showed that if GDP accelerates significantly, then 2/3 of the incumbents get re-elected. However, there has been no significant acceleration under Modi. He will not benefit. The trends show that, an incumbent will typically have a honeymoon with voters for the first 3 years. Then the tide will turn and anti-incumbency kicks in. If you go back to the 1990s, 75% of incumbents used to lose. When GDP in India accelerated between 2005 and 2010, because of that acceleration, suddenly 75% of incumbents began to win. After 2010, once again growth has stagnated or fallen. So once again you are seeing anti-incumbency come to the fore. 75% of incumbents lose. If you look at the state elections in recent times, wherever the BJP was an anti-incumbent, as in UP or Himachal or Karnataka or Uttarakhand, it did much better and generally won. But if the BJP itself wasn't the incumbent, as in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, it fared badly. So very clearly, anti-incumbency is a strong factor right now. And in 2019, at the central level, Modi is the incumbent and he faces the heat. Why will he lose ground? In 2014, he won almost 90% of the seats in the Hindi belt. This time, even if he wins 2/3 of the seats, it still means he's going to lose at least 55 seats and maybe more. In theory, he could improve his tally in the northeastern states. There was talk of clean sweep of 25. But frankly, that is not going to happen because of his position on the citizenship bill. I don't know why he has introduced it at this point. The Northeast is dead against giving blanket immunity to migrants from Bangladesh. So I think he is going to lose some ground there. He could gain ground in West Bengal, Odisha. Will this all make up for losses in the Hindi belt? I doubt it. In 2014, the BJP got only 31.4% of the vote. Along with the allies, the NDA won 37% of the vote. So as you can see, it was not a huge victory. And if there is going to be erosion of that 37%, as well as a combined opposition in many states, you can see that there are difficulties. Finally, I had found that when I went to UP and Bihar in the last election, I said, what do you know about Modi? He's a man in Gujarat. Why are you going to vote for him? And they all said, our fellow migrant workers have been going to Gujarat, and they say it's a place where people from UP and Bihar are welcome, and we would like that thing to be extended here. Unfortunately, last year there were riots in Gujarat against UP workers and Bihar workers, and many had to go back. So I think this advantage that he got, he has lost. Let us consider the degrees of NDA vote erosion. Now, and the TDP has left the NDA. The Shiv Sena is still there. So they had 320 seats right now, shall we say, with the Shiv Sena in the NDA. Suppose they lose 40 seats. It would mean then the NDA wins 280 seats, a bare majority. So Modi would be cut to size, but he remained in the saddle. Let us consider larger erosion. Suppose the NDA loses 70 seats and gets, say, 250. Now, 250 is not far short of a majority of 273. And along with minor parties, surely he will be able to form a government. BJP will be able to form a government. There are some analysts who theorize that the allies can't stand Modi personally, saying he's so arrogant and so unapproachable. Why not have Gadkari or somebody else? In fact, Chandrababu Naidu at one time said, we'd support anybody but Modi. All I can say is that anybody who thinks that the BJP will dump Modi just to stay in power, I think they are completely mistaken. If the other regional parties say anybody but Modi, they will say, no, we will sit in the opposition, we will watch you collapse. But we are not going to dump Modi. Okay, well, suppose there is a major erosion. The NDA loses 100 seats or more. In that case, a disparate opposition could form the government. This could be shaky, it could collapse in a few years. Which of these erosions will come about? Well, you are seeing various opinion polls right now. I will quote my own Times Now opinion poll, which thinks the NDA will win 252 seats. If it wins 252 with regional parties, it will surely form the next government. You'll consider 4 possible election outcomes. First, what is the chances of the NDA winning outright more than 273 seats? I would say not more than 10%. Not impossible, but a remote possibility. The number 2, a hung parliament with BJP forming a government with the regional parties, at least a 40% chance. Very substantial things. Some people would put it higher. Third possible outcome, a hung parliament in which the third front backed by the Congress forms a government. I would say 40% chance of this. Who would be the contender for Prime Minister? It could be Mayawati especially. It depends. If the SP-BSP group sweeps Uttar Pradesh, and if they get, say, 60 seats, that would be the strongest single regional bloc. It would be in a strong position to steer itself to the top. There is an agreement between Mayawati and Akhilesh that if this happens, Mayawati for Delhi and Akhilesh for Lucknow. That is supposed to be the division of power between them. So if they sweep UP, that will be their strategy. However, other regional parties may well say, why them? Regional parties, as we discovered in 1996, did not want any strong regional person to become Prime Minister. So they chose a non-entity, Mr. Deve Gowda. And when he was toppled, they chose even more of a non-entity, Mr. Narendra Gujral. So is there a chance of a non-entity time? Yes, there is a chance. As somebody even said, why not bring Deve Gowda back? Give him a second term. My other choice for a non-entity is Mr. Chamling, 5-time Chief Minister of Sikkim. So he's a veteran politician with a track record. He poses no threat to anybody else whatsoever. So he's the kind of non-entity who could head a third front government. So overall, if you consider this is Modi's chances of returning power, I'm putting at 50-50. But if he's able to make some kind of successful muscular response to Pulwama, his odds would go up. It could become 60%, 70%, depending on what exactly happens. Modi is hoping to do. What happened? Let me add, a muscular response can go badly wrong. If you send your bombers out and your bombers get shot down, you will have egg on your face. If you send your Jawans in an attack and they get slaughtered, you will have egg on your face. It's always worth remembering Mr. Jimmy Carter, US President. He sent his planes in to rescue the hostages in Iran in 1978. The planes crashed, and he thought that with that he will win the next election. Because it was a fiasco, he lost the next election. So I think Mr. Modi would also have to watch out that you try a muscular response, it could win you the election, it could also backfire. What will be the economic fallout of these different outcomes? First, consider an outright NDA victory. For the economy, I think this would be the best outcome because there would be stability, there would be continuity. In this scenario, Mr. Modi would be able to resist populist and protectionist pressures. In the second term, he would reap dividends from first-term reforms like GST and the IBC. And in the second term, Mr. Modi could conceivably then control both the Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, which would be an advantage. It would also make radical reform possible, but I do not think radical reforms are likely. I think Mr. Modi will stick to incrementalism plus welfareism, as he did in his first term. Assuming a decent global economy, you can't take this for granted, I think there's a chance for a global recession. But assuming a decent global economy, if there is an outright NDA victory, giving Mr. Modi a strong second term, I think GDP growth could actually accelerate to 8% over the next 5 years. Outcome number 2. There's a hung parliament and Mr. Modi forms the government along with regional parties. This scenario holds fair prospects for decent economic policy and growth. Modi would be in charge, although diminished. However, corruption and populism will increase. I mean, if you have to accommodate regional parties and you will be lost without them, then they will have to be given some scope. Mr. Manmohan Singh, I think, coined this phrase called coalition dharma, means that I have to allow my coalition partners to play some games, otherwise my government will fall. You might find Mr. Modi in a similar situation. In this kind of scenario, there will be more favors to important regions and vote banks. Right now, the PMO completely controls all the ministries and several state governments. But if you had this kind of outcome of a hung parliament, power will be decentralized substantially and individual ministers will be able to stand up to Mr. Modi. Incremental reforms would continue at a slower pace. In this scenario, I think GDP growth could be 7 to 7.5%. Sorry. Whoops. Outcome 3. Suppose there's a third front government led by Mamta or Chamling or whoever. Third front government will be unstable, may not be quite as unstable as in 1996-98 when 2 prime ministers lasted only 11 months each, but could be unstable. Could be lots of corruption and populism. Everybody will know this government is not going to last very long, so please make hay while the sun shines. When you come to think of it, economic policy in 1996-98 was not bad at all. There were ongoing economic reforms. But at that time, there was still this shadow of the great economic crisis of 1991. That had installed a discipline and had created a glide path of liberalization, so you continued going down that particular glide path. That pressure has now gone. There is no longer any glide path to liberalization. If at all, there is a glide path going back to protectionism and populism of various kinds. So there will be less of a check on bad behavior. There could be fiscal indiscipline. There could be all kinds of giveaways. And yet, if you look at the history of India, it suggests that even when there is bad behavior, it's not too bad. When you compare what has happened in populist excesses in various other countries, India's long-term track record is not bad. So in this scenario, I would say GDP growth could still exceed 6% on average. Sorry. Outcome 4. Congress-led government, it would be similar. Even if it heads a coalition government, the Congress will have half or less of the seats. It will be very vulnerable to pressure from partners. No guarantee of lasting 5 years. In fact, I know some Congress people who said that even if we have the chance, we should not try to form a government. We will make a fool of ourselves. Better to let Mr. Devagowda or Mr. Chamling try to form the government and support from outside. The kind of thing they have done in Karnataka. That even if it's the largest party, we will not attempt to form the government. We will support from outside. If this kind of Congress party government comes to power, as usual, as normal, it will focus on freebies, subsidies and giveaways to various vote banks. It will not be a growth-oriented government. That has never been the main point of Sonia Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi. Corruption and populism will, I'm afraid, return. The Congress party has been out of power in so many states for so long, it desperately needs to refill its treasuries. And unlike the BJP or Communist Party, the Congress Party has no voluntary cadres. Everybody has to be paid. And if every minister has to maintain 200 salaries, you can understand how much money needs to be made. Even if nobody is pocketing money, the machine requires a lot of greasing. In this scenario, GDP growth could still exceed 6%, as in the other case. So what I'm really saying is that there can be a range of 6 to 8% GDP growth, depending on which outcome we get. This is a kind of average. If there's a recession, surely growth will go below 6. But on average, you might expect this. The long run, looking just beyond the elections, India did well has done the entire coalition era before Modi, for between 1991 and 2014. So we shouldn't despair. There are coalition quarrels, corruptions, bad decisions, economic paralysis from time to time, and still, the system works. India has strong political and economic fundamentals and big catch-up possibilities. We are so far below our potential that, the possibility of catching up, especially in the backward states, is enormous. Note that even if GDP growth dips to 6%, India may be the fastest growing economy in the world. I spent half the year in Washington, half the year here. Whenever I come to here, everybody thinks India is a mess. You go to Washington, frankly, it looks like one of the fastest growing economies with a long-term record of fast growth, standing up in the midst of all kinds of difficulties. So at the end of it all, I would say, there is something going for you, which is not evident if you look at the shenanigans within India itself. All the tiger economies with 7% growth, they achieved it thanks to two things: a demographic dividend and buoyant exports. In Modi's India in the last 5 years, exports have been completely stagnant. And I quoted you some of those workforce figures that there is no demographic dividend at all. So on the one hand, it is a very discouraging thing that we don't have a demographic dividend and we have stagnant exports. On the hand, without these two, to achieve 7% growth means we have achieved something that no other miracle economy could achieve. It would appear there are some enormous improvements in productivity going on, even if they aren't immediately visible. That's a plus sign. I think this is happening mainly because we get a road, electricity, and telecom to a village. Basically, they become towns and huge new possibilities arise. And, at the grassroots level, there's an explosion. And while people may talk about agrarian distress, you talk to Hindustan Lever or Hero Motors, everybody is selling in the rural areas and the small towns. So those are the areas which are coming up in a big way. And they are not very visible, perhaps, to investors like you. But I think that is part of the dynamism we can depend on. Again, for most small economies which had to grow fast, to reap the gains of trade, they had to enormously increase exports to other countries. In the case of India, we haven't done that. But each Indian state is as big as a country. So trade between states of India can give you the same kind of gains of trade as Hong Kong or Singapore got by trading across borders. So I think this is one reason why we have managed to keep up high growth despite stagnant exports. Of course, I don't want this to last, but so far so good. I'll simply say that there is a chance that the whole world is going to turn inward-looking. Mr. Trump is certainly turning protectionist inward-looking. There are problems in Europe. There are problems in many other countries. If the world turns inwards, as seems quite possible, if global growth slows down, India, because of its diversity and its large internal market, I think we are better placed to withstand a global slowdown than most other countries. So we would do relatively well, though of course we would suffer. along with everybody else. Thank you.
So,
there's a demand for you to be here next year as well.
Okay.
At the same time, you save your slide today comments also.
Very good. Let us see.
what we'll do is we'll quickly open the floor for just a couple of questions. Should we take some questions, sir?
Yes.
A couple of questions? Okay. Please raise your hand and please introduce yourself. We'll have the mic passed out to you.
सर मैं लास्ट 5 साल से आपको पढ़ रहा हूँ इकोनॉमिक टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया में, और आप थोड़ा सा जो है मतलब मोदी के प्रति आपका थोड़ा सा कुछ नाराजगी है, ये मुझे रोज की रीडिंग में दिखता है। और आप अगले साल भी आना, वी विल सी यू 2020 एंड द सेम योर टुडेज ऑब्जर्वेशन।
You are right. Narazi है. Now, I will simply say...
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I am concerned, I support or criticize on individual merit. I don't take an overall position. Some people say, which party are you for? I say, I am against all the parties. So since I am against all the parties, I am free to criticize all. So I am not for anybody. I am against everybody. And so certainly Mr. Modi will agree that I am not for him. But he will also agree I am not for Congress, I am not for the Communists, I am not for the Shiv Sena.
Sir, could you throw some light on the 7% figure that you mentioned? You mentioned the 7% figure that Mr. Modi has achieved that without, the demographic dividend and the buoyant exports. So could you throw some light onto how did he achieve that? Because I'm not understanding the indicators.
But can you repeat the? I'm hard of hearing.
Can I say it again?
Huh?
You mentioned 7% growth rate of Modi without the demographic dividend and the buoyant exports.
Yes.
So could you explain in that case how that was achieved? Because what are the indicators of the demographic dividend and buoyant exports? I haven't understood the difference.
Yeah, okay. Now, typically a demographic dividend should be able to add 0.5% to your GDP growth. Without that, it should be lower. As far as exports are concerned, there are major gains of trade. You see, if I only depend on the domestic market, that limits my demand. If I am able to export to the rest of the world, there is unlimited demand. So these are two reasons why normally these things enable you to grow faster. There is a larger amount of demand to cater to. How have we done it? The only way you can say is that my productivity is 1.5 or 2% higher than the miracle economies had at the time they were doing 7%. And this higher productivity enables me to reach 7%, even though I do not have buoyant exports, even though I haven't had the demographic dividend. Now, then the question is this plausible? If you look around India, look around at you gentlemen, have you suddenly become very productive? Can you claim to be all miracle people? You can look at the rest of India. When you just look at it, there is some difficulty in understanding what are we doing which is such a miracle of productivity. The one thing I see is the transformation of our villages into towns. That, I think, is a huge source of increased productivity. It is not immediately obvious, and it's not overnight, but it is a fact that in the last 5 years, the extension of the road network, telecom network, and electricity network has been very substantial. Not just for Modi. I mean, Mamta has done it in Bengal, Nitish did it in Bihar. So, at every level, many of the backward states, there has been a huge improvement in rural infrastructure. I believe that could be the source of this hugely improved productivity. I can't hear.
All right. I'm going to request you to please raise your hands. We have time for last 2 questions. Sir, we'll take yours first and then.
So, right here. So my question is two-pronged. Firstly, about GST. We used to hear a lot of things that as soon as GST comes in, it's going to add 1% to our GDP, etc. Do you see that playing out? I'm not asking you for a 10-year horizon or something, but it's been a year or 2 since GST has come. We've not seen the benefits accrue as of yet. So do you see that happening in the next 1 or 2 coming years? And my second question politically is about Modi. You mentioned we all benchmark everything to the 2014 election. That, okay, that is where this happened. So either he's going to gain from there or lose from there. But like you said, a lot of things have happened in the rural areas. So don't you think the people voting in the rural areas will disregard a little bit of, say, religious aspects or caste-based voting sort of thing, because they'll see this person is genuinely try to uplift them by providing gas and roads, etc., without any discrimination. So do you feel that he is going to, yeah. So that is a popular sentiment, and do you think it's going to add up to the elections as well? A lot of younger people coming in voting. Don't you think he can actually do better than 2014 elections? Is it a possibility?
Some people may applaud, but there is no substantial basis for this enthusiasm on the basis of the electoral voting figures. You please look state election after state election after state election. In every state election, the BJP's vote share has been even less than their share in the 2014 general election. Please remember this. So the idea that he has been very impressive.
But that is.
Let me finish, please. Let me finish. No, please, let me finish.
Sir, ladies and gentlemen, let's first hear from Sir, and then we'll come back to you again. We'll have the mic passed on.
The record is very clear. There is no, there was a kind of Modi wave, huge enthusiasm, but even then, he only got 31% of the total vote. The NDA together, along with the NDA, only 37%. So it was basically a splintered opposition that led to that big victory. It certainly was not that everybody was rolling over and saying, you are the Paramatma, you are the savior. That is certainly not the case. The majority were not for him. Please be very clear. And in every state election, he has got less votes than he got in 2014. In every state election. So there is certainly the idea that everybody thinks Modi has done an excellent job, or that he doesn't believe in caste or violence. That is not the case. There is significant opposition. Mr. Modi is in trouble. That's why I'm giving him at least a 50% chance of losing the election.
So also, is it fair to compare the state election with the national election? Let's say, for example, Madhya Pradesh.
Sir, I'm not going to argue with you, please. I'm not going to argue with you. So next question, please.
I'll have to pause over here. Sir, last question.
Sir, you have made your observation about the present government and what you expect out of it. So if I may ask you, 5 years, whatever work that has been done by this government and whatever points that you have allotted to them, what would have been 3 best things done by them and 3 worst things done by them? And on the basis of which, these numbers which you have plotted for them are going to be accounted for.
Well, as I said, I mentioned some. I think the GST, it required a lot of courage on the part of Jaitley to say, I will take all the state losses for so many years, no matter what they are. So he was able to get GST through by making that bold gesture. That's a very major plus. IBC. Earlier on, Raghuram Rajan had started he recognized the problem, but his measures didn't have teeth. This IBC actually has teeth. For the first time, I'm seeing these biggest of these big industrialists like SR and so on getting thrown out, which I think is an excellent thing. We badly needed to have that son. That, I would say, is the second biggest reform. If you ask me for the third biggest reform, I would say in general it is an emphasis on some surprise areas. I think Swachh Bharat was an important thing. These were, in effect, it was not Modi's new thing. He was building on Congress initiatives. Swachh Bharat was started by Congress. Jan Dhan Yojana was started by Congress. So Modi was clever in selecting which are the Congress platforms which are good. He built on them.
So the worst side. Sir, we'll have to call it a wrap. I believe you have a mic. We'll take that as the last, but very quick, sir.
Sir, what are your views on Rahul and Priyanka?
Rahul and Priyanka are proven flops, to put it bluntly. Under Rahul, last election was, in some sense, Rahul was in charge. And they came down to 44 seats, the worst in their history. In the case of Priyanka, people are talking as though she's just entering politics. She's not entering politics for the first time. In 2014, she was put in charge of the two family constituencies in UP, which are the equivalent of 10 assembly constituencies. Out of the 10, Priyanka lost 8 out of 10. So in other words, let's not pretend she's a new factor. She was there in 2014 and flopped. Now, there was such a Modi wave that you can argue that everybody got swept aside, including Priyanka, in 2014. After all, the BJP and allies won 73 out of 80 seats. And you may think it's an exceptional thing. I will merely say that the two put together, the actual track record to date, it's not very impressive. However, from 44, I would certainly expect them to double. It could certainly go to 90, 100. I wouldn't expect it to go much higher. Thank you.